From the moment Howard Clarkson stepped up to the gate counter, time itself seemed to pause, only to snap back when the gate agent, Jenna, responded with a sharp sneer. "That Purple Heart license plate doesn't get you special treatment," she snapped, all but dismissing his well-worn scars in the polite vinyl VAI he held. At 72, Howard's gait was steady enough, but each step carried the weight of decades spent in grinding combat in Afghanistan. He had come to the airport not to demand respect, but only to request a few extra minutes to board calmly without worsening the persistent ache. "Sir, you look like you fell off a bar stool, not survived a firefight," Jenna continued, her tone dripping with contempt. With every spoken word, she dismissed his service and painted his rightful request as an act of fraud. Howard felt a familiar sting, a reminder that invisible wounds were often the hardest to see and too easily disbelieved. He cleared his throat gently. He had a long record of maintaining his dignity. He couldn't allow the moment to fracture that. "I'm not asking for first class," he said quietly, the fatigue in his voice unmistakable. "I just need a moment to settle before boarding begins." Still, Jenna shook her head. Her uniform, a crisp airline-branded blazer, stood in sharp contrast to his veteran's service-worn coat. She told him flatly, "Pre-boarding is for those with a wheelchair or those traveling with young children. And frankly, you don't appear to meet either requirement." The finale of her decree hit Howard harder than any bomb blast. He had requested something that should have. He looked down at his hands, fingers diagnosing the invisible twinge in his hip. The scar above his brow, barely noticeable, carried the memory of a grenade blast that cost him 15 years of mobility. But none of that seemed to matter to Jenna. He tried again in a voice as steady as he could muster. "My requests," Jenna laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed unnervingly. Every step toward the waiting area was a reminder of the trust he had placed in an airline that claimed to honor veterans. From the moment Howard Clarkson left the gate with a bruised pride, his mind wrestled with more than just physical discomfort. That morning he had flown in with a simple request, pre-boarding to ease his hip, and left feeling invisible. Yet the flight to San Diego. As he settled into the crowded waiting area, Howard closed his eyes. He pictured the rows of seats ahead. Full, hurried travelers stepping over each other to board. He felt small, an elderly man among strangers, with no one recognizing the damage he'd carried home. But he refused to surrender to bitterness. Instead, he quietly reached for his phone and navigated to Skylink Airlines' Veterans Feedback Portal. His hands trembled not from age, but from the emotional weight of recounting through humiliation. He tapped, "My name is Howard Clarkson, Purple Heart recipient. Today at Gate 14, I was denied pre-boarding despite documented injuries. I did not ask for privilege. I asked for compassion." The gate agent's tone was offensive and dismissive. "I request acknowledgement and that policies be reviewed to prevent this from happening to other veterans." With one final breath, he hit send. He sat back, trying to steady himself as the ache returned, but in that ache lay familiarity. It meant he had survived. Around him, travelers chatted and laughed, unaware of the quiet courage simmering under Howard's calm exterior. 5 minutes later, just as Zone 3 was being called, an unexpected hush fell. The boarding announcement paused, and all eyes turned toward Gate 14. There, Captain Eva Rostrava appeared, her uniform immaculate, her air of authority unmistakable. As an Air Force veteran herself, she carried a quiet but... His breath caught. She raised her hand and Howard blinked. Captain Rostrava faced the crowded gate. Passengers murmured. Then Captain Rostrava made her decision. "Sergeant Clarkson, seat 1A," and Howard shook his head in quiet disbelief. "I don't deserve that, ma'am." She smiled, warm but firm. "You do deserve it, because respect isn't optional." She gestured gently. "May I escort?" He nodded, and together they walked down the jet bridge. First-class passengers stood aside, offering. As the plane climbed into the overcast sky, Howard gazed out the window. He thought of his fellow. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over the History tab. And in the quiet hum of the cabin, Howard Clarkson realized that dignity isn't a luxury. It's a right earned through service and defended with grace. When the wheels touched down in San Diego, Howard Clarkson felt a soft reverberation through his bones. not just from the landing, but from something far deeper. The warm Pacific breeze welcomed him back as he leaned forward, cane in hand, heart steady with purpose. He was here for the annual Marine Recon Reunion, a gathering that honored sacrifice and brotherhood, but this time it also carried a new weight. As he stepped off the plane, Captain Eva Rostrava, balancing duty and compassion, offered Howard an escort straight to baggage claim. She shared that Brenda had been placed on leave pending a full review, and the airline had begun mandatory empathy training for all staff. Howard nodded with gratitude. This victory wasn't about justice for himself alone. It stood for empathy rising above bureaucracy. In the terminal, Howard spotted familiar faces in Marine caps and jackets. They saw him. Some cheered softly. Others met his gaze with quiet pride. One greeted him with tears in his eyes. Former corpsman Tom Rivera, who had patched Howard up in the field decades earlier. Their embrace was brief but powerful, an anchor in a storm of memories. Together they made their way to a shuttle taking them to a beachfront retreat. The salt air smelled of promise. During the drive, Howard reflected on the earlier confrontation at the gate, the pilot's intervention, and the ripple effect it created among passengers and crew. But the story hadn't stopped at the airport. It followed him here. At the retreat, the reunion buzzed with reunion hugs, ceremony, and reflection. Photos of fallen brothers lined the tables. Howard took his place among them, cane resting beside the polished wood bench reserved in his name. He felt the ache in his hip, memory of the older wound, but also the warmth of belonging. Then came the formal gathering. A circle of men, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, came together. Howard rose unsteadily but deliberately. Conversations quieted, eyes turned toward him, attentive. "I haven't always stood in front of a crowd like this," he began. Heads nodded. He continued, "It took a kind pilot and a community's response to show me that when we speak up, when we carry our stories calmly and clearly, others will stand behind us. Because they matter. You matter. And what happens here carries far beyond us." Silence settled, not heavy, but reverent. Then Corpsman Rivera spoke. "You reminded us, Howard, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's in seeking what's right, even when quiet." Others murmured agreement. Later that evening, under a canopy of stars and soft string lights, the men circled around a small bonfire. Photos and medals were shared. Howard recounted the airport incident, not as a complaint, but as a lesson. "It's easy to give up," he said, "to walk away quietly. But by raising my voice, not in anger but in clarity, I sparked a shift." He looked around, younger veterans, spouses, families. "We owe that not just to ourselves, but to the next generation." One young Marine whispered to him, "You changed something today." For Howard smiled, feeling the sting in his hip again. But it was tempered by pride. That night, leaders set an agenda for outreach. Howard's story would be shared at VA hospitals and community centers. They pledged to advocate for improved disability awareness and for policies ensuring veterans don't bear the burden of invisibility. As the reunion wound down, friends embraced and clasped his hand. Howard raised a small toast to dignity earned, defended, and recognized. May we all carry it forward. Glasses clinked softly. The breeze carried their collective hope into the night. Howard Clarkson had begun the day seeking respect for himself. He ended it reigniting a movement of quiet courage, proving that one man's calm stand can inspire many. Under the pale glow of a setting sun, Howard Clarkson stood before the sleek memorial wall at the reunion grounds. The names of his fallen brothers etched in solemn rows, each one a story, each one a promise never forgotten. His cane's tip tapped softly against the paving stones as he, to his right, Captain Eva Rostrava, a proud Air Force veteran turned commercial pilot, nodded in respect. Over the past hours, they had become allies, united by one man's quiet insistence that dignity matters. Together, they surveyed the engraved names, a sacred roll call to courage. Howard crouched and traced a blade of grass near the base of the wall. "They trusted me to have their six," he murmured. "Now I have to trust all of you to do the same for those who come after." At 76, he had already given decades to service, and today he was giving more. insight into his audience included fellow veterans, some leaning heavily on canes like his own, children of servicemen and women, and community leaders. They listened closely as he shared how earlier that morning, a gate agent at the airport had dismissed his request for pre-boarding, seeing only an able-bodied old man. "But Captain Rostrava saw me," he said, glancing at her. "She stood up, saluted, and even gave me her own seat. That gesture restored something I didn't know was broken." A quiet gasp. He paused, collecting his thoughts. "We served our country in sweat and hardship. Not for glory, but for something deeper. Protecting lives, preserving ways of life, forging bonds that no peacetime could sever." His weathered face softened. "When I was scorned at the gate, I could have stayed silent. I could have let my pride be trampled. But I didn't. I spoke with calm clarity, and that compelled others to act. A hush held the group. Children shifted, veterans looked away to battle memories, and parents grasped. Howard looked at the younger veterans. "I want you to remember this. Courage lasts." Then he shared the news. "The airline is overhauling policies to better." He straightened and cleared his throat. "True courage isn't always loud. It often comes in quiet conviction." Even if this story moved you, please comment below with the word honor and share a moment when you stood, or wished you had, spoken up for dignity. And don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories that remind us respect isn't earned just once. It's upheld every day.